learn. Lord, I thank you for this information that we're learning about how to read this book. Because as much as we love it, sometimes we don't understand it. Lord, I thank you for these people are here, and I just pray for a nice, rich time together. In your name I pray, amen. Okay, so when I say the word apocalypse, what do you think of?
Zombies.
Zombies. Hey, listen, I heard NPR said one time somebody hacked into the National Emergency Broadcast System in Nebraska, one of those places, and said the zombie apocalypse had occurred and for people to just stay in their homes until they get further notice. And like the 911 center in a lot of cities was deluged with calls from people wanting to know what they were supposed to do. So anyway, okay, so we think of zombies. What else do you think of? End times. All right, does anybody know what the Greek word for apocalypse means? Anybody?
Derek does.
Derek does, he can't answer. No, you can.
To reveal.
Yeah. It means to reveal or to unveil. So apocalyptic literature is a genre of Jewish literature that's characterized by its use of symbolic images to reveal God's mysterious, providential workings behind the scenes and his coming plans for the future. That's apocalyptic literature in a nutshell. It was written over a span of about 400 years from the 2nd century BC to the 2nd century AD. So what are the two books in the Bible that are considered apocalyptic? Daniel and Revelation. Excuse me. So they both share characteristics of it. There is an expectation of the in-breaking of God into the present age to usher in whatever he has planned for the age to come. They use angelic mediators, angels to communicate God's message to a chosen person. The person who is chosen as the human recipient usually gets to journey to heaven and other places. There is very highly symbolic visions and dreams, and it describes both current hidden spiritual realities and future divine interventions. Excuse me. There's a vision of final divine judgment in these books. There's a warning of coming distress and trials that's going to be faced by the faithful. And there's an encouragement to persevere in light of everything that's going on. So those are kind of the characteristics of apocalyptic literature. So in the Bible, the books of Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Zechariah all have sections in them that are considered apocalyptic. But the only two Bibles canonical, which means they were picked to be in the canon of Scripture, that are considered to be apocalyptic genre are Daniel and Revelation. So I don't know, in the book it had a challenge to read through either the book of Daniel or the book of Revelation. I'm doing Bible study fellowship on Tuesday nights, and we have been studying Revelation, and it is the weirdest thing I have ever. It's really, really good. It has been really good, and I have learned stuff that I had never been taught before about Revelation. So I've really enjoyed it, but it is so strange. Just strange stuff going on. In the Greek, the title for this book, the book of Revelation, is The Apocalypse or Revelation of John. I wasn't gonna dare try to say the Greek for that. So Dr. Plummer says, without some understanding of the genre of apocalypse, both Daniel and Revelation will remain enigmas to modern readers. Duh. It's just, they're hard books to read, is just the general thing. So, interpreting Daniel, they think Daniel was first transcribed in the 6th century BC, so it was really kind of written before that 400-year period there. Chapters 7 through 12 describe this great shifts of international power that's going to happen in the coming centuries. Thank you so much. None of my high school students would do that. And there's a special emphasis on battles in the book of Daniel. So Daniel's visions, especially in chapter 12, anticipate a climax of history and the resurrection of the dead, which is kind of like what we have in Revelation. So here's the thing about interpreting Daniel. His suggestion is get a good study Bible or a good commentary, or find somebody who has really studied it before you start trying to read it. When you're interpreting Revelation, he says we have to be careful to interpret the symbolic images according to the author's intent. Because of the difficulty in understanding some parts of Revelations, we should not adopt any interpretation that is out of harmony with the rest of the Bible. We must have great humility. Be willing to say, I do not understand this at all. So he says there's 4 different interpretive approaches. Okay? So the first one is called the preterist, and it believes that portions of Revelation may have been forward-looking when it was initially written, but that almost all of the events have already taken place, probably in the 1st century or soon thereafter, and that much of the cataclysmic symbols in Revelation are related to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in AD 70. So preterists don't believe that Revelation is a foretelling of what's coming in the future. They think it's just what has already happened. There's a historicist view which says that Revelation is just a blueprint of the entire span of church history. And parts of it describe the past and parts are describing what's going to happen in the future. An idealist believes that it describes spiritual realities that reoccur throughout history until the final consummation when Jesus comes back. And it is erroneous to seek particular rulers or events that uniquely correspond with the images and events in Revelation. I mean, I thought, how many people during World War II, just thought, Hitler's the Antichrist and, all of this stuff. We can make what we see in Revelation fit for just about any time period. We could make it fit now with everything that's going on. So you have to be really careful about doing that because over and over again, just every time there's been some cataclysmic thing that has happened in the world, people start talking about, oh, Jesus is coming back and this person is this and this person is this. And, how many of y'all, all those people who say, Jesus is coming back October the 12th, 2027. And I think they say that and God goes, no. I may come back the 28th, but I'm not going to come back the 27th. So, and then the futurist view believes that the majority of Revelation is applied to future end time events that occur directly prior to Christ's return. I don't know where you fit in that, because I don't know where I fit in that, because I'm just still trying to get through Revelation. I had a friend one time, they say there's premillennialist and postmillennialist and all of those millennialist things. And he said, I'm just a pan-millennialist. I believe it's all going to pan out in the end, and I'm not going to worry about stuff. So, scholars usually adopt a whole bunch of these views, a combination of these views. Plummer, who wrote our book, believes that like Revelation 2 and 3, which is basically the letters to the churches, are best read through the preterist lens, something that has already happened, and that most of the book should be understood according to the idealist approach, and that some portions of Revelation are going to happen in the future. So he's kind of over all of those. So here's some guidelines for studying Revelation. First of all, I think the most important thing that we have to remember in studying Revelation is it was not written to us. We are not the primary audience. And I think you have to read the entire Bible this way. You have to read the Bible through the lens of the primary audience. Who was John writing to at this time? He was writing to these 7 churches who were struggling and going through things, to let them know this vision that he had had. So he was writing to them. We are a secondary audience. We are not the primary audience. So we have to look at who was he writing to and what was going on. I also heard an interesting thing, and I don't know how accurate this is, but where was John when he wrote Revelation? He was on the Isle of Patmos. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but I've heard it was just a really grim place to be. He was there because they considered him an insurrectionist and he was causing trouble for Rome, so they sent him to Patmos. So this guy said, first of all of these symbols that John wrote in Revelation, his readers would have recognized those. They would have understood what he was talking about in ways that we don't, because we live in the 21st century and all of that. And that also he wrote in symbols so that the guards would just let his letters through. That his letters were probably being read, just like anybody who's in jail somewhere and they're checking his mail. And so that's just an interesting thing to think about. So we need to read it from the perspective of the original audience. How would these early Christians of Asia Minor and these churches have read all of this information? And they would have had cultural information that we don't have. And sometimes I think, especially as Americans, we're really bad about taking stuff in the Bible and trying to make it fit our culture instead of looking at what was going on. Here's a good example. How many of y'all have ever read the book Hawaii by Leon Uris? I mean, it was written, I don't know, he probably wrote it in the 60s. But there's a whole section, and this has stayed with me. I was in high school when I read this book. But there's a whole section of it where these missionaries from New England go to Hawaii to convert all the people living in Hawaii at the time. And when they convert them, they make them start wearing long dresses and long sleeves and covering up. And the men had to, they took their culture from New England and incorporated that into, if you're going to be a Christian, then this is what you have to do and this is how you have to live. Just something that has always stuck with me. So we need to read Revelation through the eyes of the original audience. We can't take the symbolic images in Revelation literally. That doesn't mean that they're not important, that they're not meaningful, or that they're not an authoritative description of reality. They point to reality in a figurative way. If you read Revelation 21:17, it says, he also measured its wall 144 cubits by human measurement, which is also an angel's measure. So a cubit is 18 inches, and I did the math, and it meant you had a wall that was 20 feet wide. So he says, he doesn't literally mean that it's just a wall of unimaginable thickness, and he is just pointing out the splendor of the heavenly city and the complete safety of all who dwell there. So I don't know if it's going to literally be like that. We also can't read it chronologically, because Christ's birth isn't even mentioned until chapter 12. So, do y'all have any questions about Revelation? Other than it's a weird book. But y'all, here's the thing that I have learned that has stuck with me the most since we started doing this, that I just think is such a picture of God's grace and mercy. That every time, like they have the trumpet judgment and the bowl judgment and all of those judgments, and every time, they're horrible, horrible things happen to the people. But every time it happens, it's one more push by God to get people to come into a relationship with Him. And nobody had ever told me that about Revelation. When I thought Revelation, I thought when you started reading this that it was done, over, you could not become a believer, once all of this stuff started, but that these plagues and all of this horrible stuff that was sent by God to say, come to me, you don't have to go through this. You don't have to do this. And there were people who came into a relationship with it. with him. I just have found that to be such a blessing, knowing that God's grace is even seen throughout all of this horrible stuff that is described that happens. So I really, really like that until God says it's done, and Jesus comes on the white horse and, which is, just go read Revelation 19, and it's so cool reading about Jesus coming on the white horse. But until God says, it is done, I am done, he's not done. People can still come into a relationship with him. And I think that is such a picture of grace. It also is a picture to me of the urgency for us as his believers, as his followers, as people who love him, to tell people who don't know about God, and tell them I don't know that I would start out with Revelation with somebody, but just to the urgency of you've got to make a decision, you've got to. And y'all, there are so many people, and this has nothing to do with Revelation, but it does have to do with urgency. So I help with FCA at our high school, and the other guy who helps, who's an actual coach, was telling me he was sitting in English class listening to some seniors, and they were talking about FCA and going to church, and he said probably out of the 7 or 8 kids that were talking, 6 of them really truly thought that because they went to church and didn't do bad things, they were saved. Y'all, you talk about a mission field right there. There are so many of our high school students, and grown-ups too, but high school students who think, well, I'm a good person. I work really hard, and I go to church every Sunday, that they're saved. So that's just a little aside from all of that. So, but do y'all have any questions about? There is extra biblical apocalyptic literature, and he has a whole list of stuff, and he encourages you to read that. He says it'll just help you gain a better understanding, because this genre is kind of foreign to us, because people don't write this way anymore, apocalyptic stuff. So, okay. So the next chapter was on exaggerated or hyperbole. How many of y'all have had, when your kids were growing up, or your husband or your wife, I'm starving. We don't rush them to the hospital because they're suffering from malnutrition. It's just hyperbolic language, exaggerated language. Jesus was a master at using exaggerated language or hyperbole. It was a literary device that he used, and it made his teaching memorable and emphatic. If you got your Bibles, turn to Matthew 5. Matthew 5, verse 29 says, verse 27, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Then he says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into jail. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go to hell. So, what do you think Jesus meant? What? Y'all are gonna have to talk louder. What did he mean? Did he literally mean gouge out your eye or cut off your hand? What was the point he was making?
That it's better not to do those things.
He was probably making the point of there needs to be a radical self-denial if you are suffering from this problem. If he was preaching today to people and he said, he's challenging people who are struggling with pornography, which is a huge problem today, he would probably tell them, cut the cables, cut the internet cables, literally cut the internet cables. Cancel this video streaming service, smash your phone, do something radical. So he wasn't calling people to literal self-mutilation. So don't cut your hands off or anything, but he was calling people to genuine and severe personal inconvenience so that you would stop doing whatever it is that you're doing that you shouldn't be doing. Does that make sense? Okay, here's what we need to avoid when we're reading exaggerated language. Okay, there's the danger of understanding it literally. But if you think about it, if you understood that verse literally and you gouged out your right eye, your left eye would still probably lust, because it's a heart problem. It's not your eye problem. It can also be used by people to say, oh, he was just exaggerating to make a point, and I'm just going to go on doing what I'm doing because he didn't mean that literally. I mean, that's the two dangers you have to be aware of. So there's several things that you can, when you read something and you think, is he serious? So one of them is if the statement he makes is literally impossible. He says in Matthew 19:24, truly I say to you, only with difficulty will a rich person enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. Okay, hyperbolic language. Okay, it is impossible for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Okay, he's just emphasizing that it's difficult for people who have all their comforts taken care of. It sometimes it can be difficult for them to see a need for God. So if the statement conflicts with what he has said elsewhere, in Matthew 23, verse 9, he says, and call no man father, your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. Okay, that conflicts because earlier he has said, honor your father and your mother, and he says the word father. So it's kind of conflicting with those. So he's using exaggerated language, and he's mostly saying, be careful that you don't exalt human leaders over God, and reduce his glory. So exaggerated language. If the statement conflicts with the actions of Jesus elsewhere, in Luke chapter 14, verse 26, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, and yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. What did he mean? You gotta love God more than anything else. Because all throughout, Jesus never taught hate your family. He said love your parents. When he was on the cross, he made sure his mom was going to be taken care of. So he's just saying, don't read this literally. You got to love God more than you love anybody else. I told a little girl the other day, she was talking about this guy she liked, and I said, does he love Jesus more than he loves you? And she said, well, I don't think so. I said, then dump him. Get rid of him. Find somebody else. If the statement conflicts with the broader teaching of Scripture, like we just talked about, we're taught to love our family, take care of our family. The statement is not always literally fulfilled in practice. It could be a cue that it's exaggerated language. In Mark chapter 13, verse 2, that's where Jesus said, you see this building in 3 days, I will tear it down and not one stone will be left standing. Well, you can go to Israel right now and find stones left standing. So he wasn't saying that literally. He was exaggerating and pointing to the fact that, he was going to die, and in 3 days he would be raised again. If the statement's literal fulfillment wouldn't achieve the desired goal, like his teaching on lust, gouging out your eye is not going to keep you from lusting. It's a heart matter. You got to take care of your heart first. Proverbs, poetry, prophecy are all use exaggerated language. In 2 Samuel, David describes Saul and Jonathan. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. So that's, they're not really swifter than eagles or stronger than lions. It's just, again, exaggerated language. And in Matthew 17:20, it's where Jesus said, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move, and that mountain will move and fall into the sea. Well, and I've never met anybody who has moved a mountain, ever. So Jesus is basically saying, through God's power and through the Holy Spirit, a believer can do things that seem impossible. And we've all seen that happen. If the statement uses all-inclusive or universal language, I had to read this a couple of times. In Colossians chapter 1, didn't mark that. Paul says, if indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. Sometimes the word all literally means all, but not always. In this one, is Paul talking about every bird, every reptile, every animal on earth is going to hear the gospel, or is he just talking about human creatures? And if he says all creation has heard this message, then why is he still making travels and going places to do that? He's just using this universal language in an exaggerated way. He's expressing all without distinction, but he's not saying all without exception. Because Paul says in Galatians, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female or anything. So that's using exaggerated language. We probably all know people who always use exaggerated language. It's always drama and everything. But as we're reading the Bible and we come across something that we just think, I don't know, that's when you have to dig deeper. So the last thing that we looked at was figures of speech. Okay, y'all, I did not realize that there were that many different kinds of figures. There's 10 different types of figures of speech. Some of them I've never heard of them, and some of them I don't know how to pronounce it. So a figure of speech is just an expression that at the base of it is to be understood non-literally. It's employed for emphasis, clarity, or freshness of thought. Like if we were going to watch a video in here, somebody would say, could somebody go hit the lights? Okay, they don't mean to go back there and literally hit the lights. Or, it's raining cats and dogs. Or let me give you a hand. What else can y'all think of? Figures of speech. What?
Rolling up the sidewalk.
Rolling up the sidewalks. If you say out loud. Anything else?
Run to the store or something like that.
Yeah.
It's gonna drive.
Yeah, I'm gonna run to the store and get something. Well, no, actually, you're gonna drive. I have kids who say, can I run to the bathroom? No, you can walk to the bathroom. But it's just that kind of thing. There are things in the Bible that we will find that are these different figures of speech. There's metaphor and simile. I've heard of those. Merism, never heard of that. Hindiotis, synecdoche, anyway, all of those. Personification, anthropomorphism, litotes, and idiom. There are all sorts of stuff. And some examples from the Bible for figure of speech. He is like a tree planted by streams of water. That's from Psalm 1. A man who is blessed, he's like a tree planted by streams of water. In the Lord's Prayer, he says, we're to pray, give us this day our daily bread. So are we only praying for bread? No, we're praying just for give us what we need for this day at this time. When Jesus says, when you're praying and giving, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. That kind of thing. In the Psalms especially, why gaze in envy, O rugged mountains? Those are all figures of speech. He says the important issue is not knowing the name of a figure of speech, but understanding the authorial meaning conveyed by figurative expression and conveying that meaning faithfully to others. We have such a responsibility as children of God that we understand this book before we start trying to tell other people what it means. And I don't think that God, I don't think that he set out to make it hard to understand. But it is something that we have to study and read and ask God to give us clarity of thought and make us smarter than we are. I pray that all the time. Make me smarter than I am. Help me to understand what this is saying. You know, we need to be willing to say to people who ask us questions about this book, I don't know, but I will find out. And then go find out. Y'all, there are so many resources on the internet that are good. There's a thing I just discovered called BibleRef.com, BibleRef.com, I think. But it's got, you can type in a book. Have you seen it, Tammy? You can type in a book, type in the chapter, pick the verse. It will give you the verse in probably 10 different translations. And then it'll go verse by verse and tell you what it means. It'll give you the context, what was going on. I mean, it's just a really easy way to find out information about the Bible. I have also discovered if you just go to Google and in the search type in like your question, you know, what does Revelation 19:12 mean? The artificial intelligence will tell you, and it'll give you websites to go to, and it's pretty accurate kind of stuff. So there is all sorts of stuff that make it easier for us to read our Bibles, but there are so many of us who don't. And I am seeing that more and more and more. There are so many people who are Christians who are biblically illiterate, and I don't know if they're scared of it or what, but that's all I've got. So apocalyptic literature. I challenge you to sometime this week sit down and read the book of Revelation. Just read it from chapter 1:1 to the very end. Just read it. I mean, just see what it says. That's my challenge. Do you have any questions or comments? Y'all are so quiet. All right. Do you have anything?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me do this. I love doing this. If you say, would you like to teach about the book of John? Yes, I would. So, thank y'all.
You heard that, Derek.
Thank you so much.